Welcome to Strategies for Reducing Burnout in Teachers and Clinicians. My name is Tamara Hunt, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health Sciences and Kinesiology at Georgia Southern University. This presentation is part of a set of professional development webinars developed by the National Youth Advocacy and Resilience Cooperative, funded by support of the National Youth Advocacy and Resilience Research Center at Georgia Southern University. Burnout, according to Black's Medical Dictionary, is defined as a mental state of physical and emotional exhaustion or a stress reaction to a person's inability to cope with the demands of their occupation. There are well-established strategies to mitigate burnout in the literature, and today I'm going to present 5 strategies that have been researched and found reliable to deal with burnout, as well as some tips along the way. Ultimately, burnout comes down to stress and stress management. At burnout's core, and by definition, it features the stress reaction and the ability to cope with these situations. And so early recognition of these factors and recognition of the signs and symptoms of burnout will really help you understand and be aware to then move into step 2, practice self-reflection. The multidimensional model of burnout suggests that 3 factors really contribute heavily to burnout: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization of teachers and patients and clients, and decreased perception of personal accomplishments. Emotional exhaustion can look like chronic fatigue, feeling depleted or drained, or taking action to distance oneself. Emotional exhaustion can also become apparent through certain situations, especially when it pertains to students or patients. Educational programming can start to feel like a chore and become unenjoyable. For me, this is a sign when I need to recharge, particularly when no matter how many days off I take from work, I still feel fatigued, which then leads to a lack of energy in other areas, including time spent with your family. Depersonalization of students and patients may include some combination of dehumanization of work tasks, chronic irritability, and loss of optimism. All of these can be grouped together to create an undesirable work environment. When we dehumanize work tasks, this can lead to a loss of optimism in our daily responsibilities, which ultimately can make us more and more irritable. Our sense of personal accomplishment can dip as feelings of ineffectiveness begin to arise. We can start to believe that our teaching style or our clinical practice is ineffective if students or clients have a bad day. Overall, this can lower our feelings of competence in what we do, leading to less productive days. Thoughts of self-doubt can then arise, questioning whether we are good enough, even if it's been confirmed in the past through coworkers, students, or patients. These thoughts of self-doubt create an inability to cope with work tasks, making for a difficult work environment. This then can translate into feelings of being overwhelmed with work projects, work tasks, social media engagement, and even one-on-one sessions. Confidence can become impeded as we view ourselves in a negative light and have a hard time seeing the positive in what we are able to contribute and the meaning in our roles. There are varying signs of potential burnout that we may be able to recognize in others before seeing it in ourselves. A lot of the big signs as you get toward the end of burnout is this loss of purpose, irritability, disinterest, and isolation. So we challenge you to ask a couple of questions to see if burnout might be occurring in a colleague or even yourself. Make sure that your purpose is aligned with what you're doing. If not, how can you align it? Seeking to align your why with your career is a desirable goal. Sometimes we can lose sight of this years or even months into a job. It is good to often revisit, why did you get into this field? Why are you doing what you're doing? To see if it matches. If you suspect this in a colleague, it wouldn't hurt to have a conversation with them about their dreams and goals. You can even inquire about what is getting them up in the morning that they enjoy about their current career. Have you or a coworker started to become irritable with clients and patients? Students not completing their work, a lack of effort, and unwillingness to be pushed can create feelings of irritability. When you notice these things and others starting to get to you or even a colleague, consider evaluating for potential burnout. This irritability can be stemming from workplace dynamics or unclear job expectations that have very little to do with your students, your patients, and your clients. So, part two is practicing self reflection. Self reflection at its core can sometimes be hard to do as we are so wrapped up with living through the stress and hopefully trying to manage that stress. So, here you want to imagine, where's your primary stress coming from? This will be different for each person. For some, it may be trying to find work life balance. Others, it could be paying bills or the responsibilities of being a parent, or even you just had that really difficult patient encounter. In this phase, we really want you to start thinking about what is causing my stress, because that's going to be the first step in developing a plan. When we think about stress and what might be causing our stress, well, how does that stress then affect our performance? This curve is the stress performance curve and is based on Yerkes-Dodson's law that says there's a relationship between pressure or stress and performance. The left-hand side of the curve represents a very low level of stress. This is when we're inactive and might even be bored. At this point, performance is incredibly low because motivation is low. As our stress levels increase, this is going to lead to better motivation and better performance. The yellow area on the graph represents the optimal area. As stress increases even more beyond that optimal level, a person's going to start becoming exhausted, and then they might feel anxiety, panic, and anger, and ultimately lead to a breakdown. So when we talk about self-care and we talk about mindfulness, mindfulness is a strategy that we might be able to use to help after we identify that stress to mitigate it. Mindfulness turns the curve around. Mindfulness practices, by training you to focus on the moment, can help you concentrate on what you're doing and help you enter a state of quote unquote flow. Too little stress leads to apathy and boredom and low performance. We need a bit of stress to lift ourselves out of apathy. As we focus on one task, we become so focused, so engrossed in a task that we can actually enter this state of flow. This is a state, for example, that athletes are going to feel when they are like in the moment. They're in the zone. And they're so engrossed that their performance is very high, but they're also enjoying what they're doing and they're not stressed. When we're in this state of flow, we enjoy the tasks that we're carrying out. We're completely focused and not stressed. We're not worrying about what might happen, and we don't think about the other 100 tasks that we need to carry out that day. We're 100% focused on the task at hand, and our performance is very high. So by entering a state of flow, we manage to achieve very high performance level with very little stress. So as we look through figuring out how we can kind of manage this stress, we want to identify and reduce those sources of stress. Once we identify them, can you eliminate any of those sources of stress? Can you reduce the amount of time you're spending in that state of stress? Can you schedule time for self-care, relaxation, and fun? Can you find time to exercise? Can you find good things that happen every day and focus on those? Number 3, complete regular assessment of goals, skills, and passion. It's important to reflect on this regularly. During your reflection, you have the ability to take a moment and think through the good and bad things. Research supports that when you focus on the good gets better. Focusing on the goals that you have, understanding your skills, and figuring out if your passion is being fulfilled or causing you additional stress will provide you an opportunity for you to develop appropriate coping mechanisms and stress reduction techniques. If you are passionate about something, then push toward that and lean into that area to help you mitigate your stress. If this is such a great idea, though, why don't we do it all the time? The reality of it is the number one reason people say they can't do something is that they don't have time to do it. We often refer to this as work-life balance, or really asking the question, how can we maximize the 24 hours in a day that we have? Putting time in the areas where you're passionate, that's the easy part. Putting time in areas that you don't want to do or the job duties that you don't like or can be difficult, that's the hard part. The key is to understand what is important to you, what are your required job duties, and then focusing on using the time that you have wisely. That is going to help you mitigate burnout. When we talk about this wonderful idea of work-life balance, much of it is going to focus on navigating your personal expectations, the expectations of the job, and the expectations of others like your supervisor, family, friends, and colleagues. To practice time management, you have to realize that this balance is not going to be an equal split. It may not be that you can spend 12 hours a day working and 12-hour days in your home life. It won't be consistent every day, or even every shift won't be the same for everybody. Maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays, you add a 2-hour drive into your commute that's not there on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And so you get to shift that time around. And last, and probably most important, one size isn't going to fit all. Priorities and lives differ for everyone. Someone working in the same job that you have with the exact same hours and exact same job duties won't balance their priorities the same way you do. They may not even have the same priorities you do. So I always like to challenge and ask my students, can we truly achieve a work-life balance? Can we really balance those scales of a 50-50 split? And I think that you can keep adding and adding things to your day, but it's not really a balance that we're looking for. It's really more of a cycle. It's really more of work-life prioritization. Maybe this week I have more work tasks that need to be done or things that take a higher priority than attending a child's soccer game. And so I might prioritize work over that soccer game on that one day. But then the next day, I might prioritize any of my child's activities over work. So the reality of it is it's really about prioritization. So tips to help work-life balance. The reality of it is we always have time to do the things we want or where our passion lies. In this instance, I would encourage us not to think of this as work-life balance, but really work-life prioritization. How do you prioritize the things you need to do with the things you want to do? The first tip that we have is let go of perfection. Nothing is going to be perfect. We are human. And sometimes you're going to need to unplug. Just move away, let it go. It's also okay to say no. There may be things in your life that you just don't have the capacity to take on, and learning how and when to say no is an important strategy to mitigate burnout. You also want to limit time-wasting activities and people. This may be unplugging and not scrolling through Instagram, or just not being available to everyone at all times. While other strategies are listed, I'm going to wrap up this talk with the importance of self-care. Number 5, practice self-care. Self-care is the active practice of seeing to your own physical and mental health needs, particularly during or after a stressful event. You can't fill someone else's cup if yours is empty. You want to make sure that you don't get to a point where your stress levels push you over the edge and then you can't help anybody else. Many organizations have identified that self-care can reduce stress and burnout, which can enhance job satisfaction. The American College of Sports Medicine's Health and Fitness Journal recently published an article called Take Care of Yourself First: 10 Self-Care Tips to Prevent Burnouts as a Personal Trainer. Other organizations have also developed self-care strategies that are specific to their environments. I have included these in our handouts for this webinar, but would also encourage you to look through any of these tools for ideas that you can use for self-care. While this may give you some options for self-care, many of the strategies may take too long or not align with your passion or things that give you joy. So, what strategies would work for you? That's probably the ultimate thing that you have to ask. It can be incredibly difficult to think about self-care strategies when you're in the middle of a stressful situation, especially when you're already worried about the lack of time that you have. So, I challenge you to come up with strategies that you can do given the time that you have. Start with, what happens if you get a full week off? What can you do? What do you need to do those activities? Typically, the longer you have, the easier it is to put self-care in that day. The difficulty comes when you don't have a ton of time. So what happens if you have 6 hours? Maybe you don't have to go in until after lunch that day. What can you do for self-care? What if you only have an hour? What if you only have your lunch hour? What can you do? What if you only have 30 minutes? And what if you only have a minute? If you can come up with these strategies prior to getting into this time-constricted stress management self-care moment, then you're already winning. So, first, it is very important to recognize stress and the factors causing stress, because if you can identify those factors, then maybe you can reduce them before you even get to a place where you're starting to think about burnout. You want to reflect on what is stressful and utilize strategies such as physical activity, mindfulness, saying no, and protecting yourself from overwhelming thoughts, to even practicing self-care as often as possible to maintain a happy and healthy lifestyle. Thank you so much for listening to this webinar. If you have any questions or would like additional information, please feel free to email me at thunt@georgiasouthern.edu. We appreciate your time, as we know it's precious. If possible, we would love your feedback about these professional development opportunities. We hope that you're willing to complete this post-webinar survey that can be accessed via the link on this slide or the QR code. Thank you and have a great day. Now, go out and practice some self-care.